Well, greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is still doing well, and welcome to this night-ending bonus upload. Before we jump into it, a couple links. As many of you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, channel membership, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon, PayPal, and channel membership is in the description below. Merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support the channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It does not cost a cent. Click the like button, takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads that I put out daily, click that bell icon, and folks, please leave a comment. Why? Well, because all of these things really do help the channel to continue to grow and go. And yes, folks, they definitely do matter. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's jump in to this night-ending bonus upload, shall we? Today's first part of the upload. I was just out driving one night because I was bored and wanted to get out. First, I want to say that I do not drink at all, or do any kind of drugs. Usually when I'm driving, I see many animals: deer, rabbit, raccoon, possum, skunk, and more. But this night, I didn't see any animals out. This was very unusual. I was about 2.5 miles outside of Cross Plains, Texas, when suddenly there was a large animal in the middle of the road eating a raccoon that had been hit by a car. I first saw a sparkle from the animal's eyes as my headlight shined on the road. I always watch for shining eyes because I know many animals are out at night. I slowed down and stopped about 30 feet from the animal, which at first looked like a large, dark gray dog eating a dead animal. It was standing on all 4 feet and started off to the left side of the road, but only moved a few feet when it turned and went back to its meal. The dog then picked up the coon in its mouth and headed off the road to the right. As I watched the dog-like animal walking off the road, the animal then raised on its hind legs as it walked toward the fence along the road. When it got to the fence, the animal jumped over the fence while still carrying the coon. I know most animals and know that a full-sized coon can easily weigh 30 pounds or more. This animal walked on its hind legs and jumped over a fence that was about 5 feet high. Didn't even touch the fence. The animal then crouched behind some weeds and a small brush. I had gotten out of my car with a flashlight to see more because I didn't know what I was seeing. I didn't know any animal like that, and I've lived in rural Texas all my life. When I shined my light on the animal, the reflection of the light on the animal's eyes was red. They didn't glow red like others describe in their encounters. It was like when you take a picture of someone, and they have red glow from the flash. I know most animals' eyes reflect a kind of blue or white sparkle when the light is shown on them. Anyway, when I was shining the light on the animal, it started a very deep, loud growl, and then a loud hissing noise. At that point, I got back to my car. I wasn't staying any longer without a gun, and I didn't have my gun with me, so I drove off. I watched the animal for a period of 8 to 10 minutes before I left. The animal had no tail and did not have spines along its back. Today's second part of the upload. A curious story about a cow that had been found dead and severely mutilated at a farm in the fens. Both the farmer's dogs had refused to go anywhere near the carcass. The farmer had called the vet immediately. Several weeks had now passed since the original discovery, and the animal's body had long been since destroyed, but I had seen mutilated cattle before in Nevada, and it's a horrific sight. Ironically, the usual explanation for mysterious cattle mutilation is that it's a predatory animal. It was clear that here it really was an animal that was responsible, but neither the farmer nor our friendly vet could satisfactorily explain what animal, in England at least, could wreak such damage. Even more significantly, and this was not known to be the farmer, the vet, or even Charlie, the attack had taken place hours after Chris Naylor and friend had heard those mysterious sounds at the burnt fen house in the early morning on the 23rd of August, which was only 9 miles away. But by the time I got back into East Anglia, there was far more dramatic news. Over the weekend of the 21st of September, the same farmer had another encounter, one that this time would need to depend on anyone's drawing skills. The farmer, let's call him John, had been severely shaken by the attack, and with resourcefulness worthy of a true investigator, immediately set about introducing security measures. The cattle were kept in a locked shed at night, opposite which there was already a security light. This is set off by movement in the yard. Anything bigger than a rabbit will do. On an adjacent barn, John installed a small webcam overlooking the yard, triggered by a simple light-sensitive switch. If the security light comes on, the webcam snaps high-resolution images every 2 seconds, saving them directly to a hard drive on a PC. It keeps this up until the light switches off again. Once triggered, it stays on for approximately 3 minutes, unless the beam continues to be interrupted. In the 3 weeks it had been in operation, it had snapped nothing but a few cats and an odd fox. Then something much bigger paid a visit. At 3:20 in the morning on the 22nd of September, again, just a few hours after the second disturbance at the burnt fen house, John was awoken by a loud crash. In the next few moments, he was convinced that he heard something moving outside. Looking out all the windows toward the yard and the nearby cattle shed, he could see nothing, but the security light was on. By now, the sounds had stopped. John headed to the PC to see what, if anything, the camera had picked up. What he found was startling. At exactly 3:17 a.m., an upright figure entered the yard from the left, the drive leading to the road, triggering the security system, seemingly unperturbed by the security light. It stands for several seconds, looking from side to side before moving further into the yard. It stops again, dead center, in the full beam of the light, and appears to look directly at the camera. Then, very suddenly and swiftly, it moves off to the right, in the direction of the cattle shed and fields beyond. When I saw these images for the first time, I found it truly chilling. One can only imagine how John must have felt that night. This creature, whatever it was, had passed just yards from him only moments before. The first thing that struck him in the silence that followed was that his dogs hadn't barked once. He found them downstairs in the kitchen, cowering in a corner, their ears flat against their heads. Needless to say, he did not investigate further outside until daylight. He never did discover the source of the crash. There were no other signs of the intruder of any kind. Today's third part of the upload is actually an encounter that happened prior to the one we just heard. It was 10:58 on a dreary evening in the late autumn of 2001 when Michael A.'s car drew to a halt on a desolate fen road several miles past 10 Mile Bank. He recalls looking at the clock on the dashboard because he was running late and cursing the fog. It was so thick that the road ahead disappeared after only about 10 meters. I had no idea where the road was heading or how to get back. Turning around seemed impossible. At the time, it seemed a stupid inconvenience, but what happened next was to turn that evening into one he was never likely to forget. Michael, a landscaper gardener who at the time lived in the village just north of Cambridge, had been on his way to visit a friend in Wisbeck when he had taken the wrong turn in the rapidly encroaching fog, taking him deeper into the fens instead of north into Wisbeck, as he had hoped, with no lights to be seen but his own. He had become anxious, and the car could veer into one of the ditches that ran on either side of the road. Though he couldn't see them, he knew they were often treacherously deep, and so had stopped to take stock and consult the road atlas. I realized that without some identifiable topographic feature, the map was not going to be much use. So I flicked off the car lights in hope of being able to see further into the fog or maybe spotting other lights. The moon was bright that night, and although it could no longer be seen, gave the fog a strange luminosity. I couldn't see much further than before, certainly not enough to pick out any kind of landmark in the featureless landscape. He then leaned over to pull out the road atlas from underneath the passenger seat. As I was leaning over, I heard and felt something brush against the outside of the car, just inches from my head. It sounded like a stiff paintbrush against the passenger door. Then almost immediately, something caught the wing mirror as it passed. The mirror snapped back with a loud clunk. The night was utterly silent, no birds or traffic. The sound made me jump out of my skin. As he sat up, Michael recalls hearing another sound. He describes it as the same sound my dog's feet make when they trot across the kitchen floor. Looking out at the road ahead and half expecting to see a dog or a fox, he was surprised to see an upright figure standing in the middle of the road. It was tall but hunched, about 5 meters from the front of the car. It looked like a man with his back to me, with his head down and his collar turned up, I thought, though I couldn't quite make it out. Michael flicked the headlights back on and got the shock of his life. It immediately turned and looked toward the car, apparently startled. Its proportions weren't like that of a man. The shoulders were very broad, and its arms much longer. With an arched back, the head was large and pushed forward, almost like a bear's. The lower body appeared hairy, but the head and neck were covered with shaggy gray fur. It looked damp and matted, like a fur on a fox, and for the moment its eyes reflected the headlights straight back like a cat or a dog's. I knew it was looking right at me. After a second hesitation, the figure dropped on all fours and rapidly disappeared into the fog ahead. I heard its feet for a few seconds, muffled by the fog, and then it was gone. The clock now read 10:59. The entire encounter lasted less than a minute. Afterward, Michael reversed the car to the point where he could safely turn, and headed back the way he had come. I was just cutting my losses. After that, all I wanted to do was go home. Nevertheless, it was some time before the experience began to properly sink in. At that time, although it was all very real, it had a quality rather like a dream. You know, where you just accept what's happened. However odd, but the next day, when I saw the wing mirror still bent forward, the reality of it being real hit me. And I need some kind of explanation. Today's fourth terrifying encounter. I had something happen to me a few miles outside of the Gila National Forest in New Mexico. Some friends and I went camping out in the boonies down on a game trail with seriously low levels of activity. I like that area of the Gila so much because a lot of it is logging land on the outskirts of legit unmapped woods. The first place we set up camp was pretty much on the edge of a pine thicket, where the forest just jutted up a ridge. Lots of trees still, but not as many as further in, if that makes sense. Anytime I go camping in a place like the Gilas, old growth forests with nobody around, I like to smudge the area with a sage bundle and roll a cigarette as kind of an offering and cleansing. I have a master's degree in cultural anthropology, and I lend a lot of credence to indigenous beliefs, especially where it concerns the wilderness. When I sat down by the fire, we set up and got my sage started, but it wouldn't light. I used my lighter. I struck it in the fire itself, but it wouldn't get lit. It just got charred and the twine burned up, but no significant smoke from the sage. This was eerie because usually that's a pretty bad sign if you foul any stuff like that. I just let it go because it was pretty dark out by this time, and to suggest moving camp probably would have gotten me hackled pretty badly by my friends. As night goes on, we're doing typical camping stuff, playing guitar and singing songs, drinking beers, roasting hot dogs, etc. When we put the fire out, I noticed just how dark the forest line really was that night, and it spooked me pretty bad. We had seen a herd of elk up on the game trail, heard some coyotes, and I even saw a dinky-looking turkey wandering around at one point in the early afternoon. So I was aware wildlife was around. But once that fire stopped popping, it was dead silent. Like you said, there was just a heaviness to it. The three of us kind of just looked around in the dark, trying to get our eyes to adjust, but figured we'd been staring at the fire for so long, we're just giving ourselves reasons to be freaked out by the darkness. So we hopped in the tent, zipped up, and just tried to get some sleep. About an hour passed before we all heard a very distinct sound of a bipedal walking very close to our camp. Crunching on the dry pine needles, twigs snapping, dirt getting kicked up. It sounded like a big burly guy was stomping around out in the middle of nowhere in the pitch black. Even writing that just gave me the chills. That shit was unsettling. We all looked at each other from our sleeping bags, eyes wide and silent, as whatever this thing was had just passed by, just one. It was so quiet. No other life could be heard. No sniffling, no snuffing like a bear would. No elk calls, no sign of jingling or equipment like a hunter might have. I honestly have no idea what in the world could make such a distinct thump, pause, but it was wild. None of us slept that night, and the next morning we moved camp down another game trail, somewhere far away from that looming ridge and tree line. Didn't see any evidence of anyone around us in at least a mile radius of camp, and still have no explanation of what I heard or experienced that night. As a side note, at the next place, we set up my sage bundle, lit, and burned a white milky smoke. Really quick interjection. I was talking to a subscriber just recently, and they were having issues, and ironically enough, I said the same thing about the sage, but I also said, make an offering of tobacco. Actually, the person had spoken to someone. They had a Sasquatch on their property, and the person was, quote unquote, a psychic, and told this person to leave gifts for a Sasquatch. And I specifically said, please do not. I said, this is your land, your decision, but I do not recommend doing it. The person was great to talk to. I mean, a really great person, but they kind of didn't know what to do, because you have this person who is supposedly a psychic or an empath saying, yes, leave a gift for a Sasquatch or whatever is out there. because supposedly the person had said there was many Sasquatch, a small pod, and a Dogman on the same property. I said the Dogman was probably just traveling through, that there would be really a hard sell for me to believe that a small pod of Squatch, being babies or young around, are gonna let a Dogman wander around their area. But I told them, I said, listen, burn your sage, say a prayer, let Mother Nature know that you're not there to do any harm, and offer tobacco, and things may change. You may feel a different feeling out there, because these animals, if they are animals, because remember, it's just theory. We don't know if they're from outer space, if they're from inner dimensions, if they're friggin' hell demons, whatever. But if they are animals and they're very in tune with nature, they're going to know that you are a good person and you made an offering to Mother Earth. So that's what I told them to do, and I hope they did it. But yeah, I mean, I hope that they did what I suggested and not put an offering out for these Squatches or whatever may be out there, because that's inviting them, and as cool as it may be to see one of these things, I do not want anyone to get hurt. It's just, that would be disturbing to me, completely just blow my mind away. But anyway, sorry for taking so long away from the stories. I just want to share that with you guys, because I really had an interesting conversation with this person, and they were a great person. I just, a little scary. Anyway, moving on. Today's fifth encounter comes to us from the Thousand Island region of New York. Does anyone remember back in the 70s, early 80s, when the Bigfoot craze was popping all over the country? Hoax after hoax, Ray Wallace stories, Biscardi, etc. was all you ever heard about. And everybody thought you were nuts for even believing. Well, this particular summer, 1980, smack dab in the middle of all the hype was when my family had our encounters. I grew up in a dairy farming family in Chemont, New York. We had a small dairy, 80 head maybe, and we worked on a farm that was my great-grandparents'. Well, my dad's health got bad, so we had to sell. We ended up buying my mother's parents' place at Sackett's Harbor, New York, where we still had a small farm, but more of a hobby farm. We had about a dozen cows, some milkers, and some heifers, and a horse or two. I also raised rabbit, guinea pig, duck, and geese. Well, first, something started harassing our cows at night in their pasture. We would hear them running and bellowing all damn night. But when we'd go out and check on them, all we'd see were spooked cattle. Now, their pasture was only fenced with a single strand of electric fence, so we figured we had a coy dog or something running them around and scooting away before we'd even get there. On the one July night, one of our calves just disappeared. We went out in the woods looking for her. Our pastures butted up right to a thick wooded area about 4 to 5 miles deep, just to find the carcass about 100 feet in. Legs gone, head and neck just torn right off like it was twisted. Very scary. The next thing to happen, a white goose of mine was found dead. It was found in the notch of a tree, 6 feet off the ground. Head and legs ripped off, and the breast area devoured. The geese were in a pen that was partially covered on the top. Maybe enough room for a hawk to fly in, but carry off a big white goose? A bobcat, maybe? This is how my family tried rationalizing it. And it worked till the rabbits and guinea pigs started vanishing. They were in hutches that had doors on the top of the cages. The little bolt locks had broken off, but we kept them closed with wooden pegs. Now, the one thing that one would need to open these cages were fingers. No four-legged animal would have been able to get those pegs out. Plus, they were on a table that was 3 feet off the ground. My parents started thinking that maybe one of our neighbor's kids were playing mean jokes on me. Then we started finding piles of fur and bones in strange places throughout the property, like on the roof of the barn, which was approximately 11 feet high. At this point, we are not even thinking Sasquatch or cryptid or whatever, because he's just a hoax, right? I'm thinking owl, a hawk, or a bobcat. I had a horse, Czar, a gelded Arabian, that I had kept separate from the other horse and cows, because he was kind of mean. I had him in another pasture, tied to a long bridle, 20 feet or so. It was tied down to an old tractor tire. He would graze in a circle, and when his grass would get scarce, we'd move him and his water trough to another part of the pasture. One morning I came down to the pasture. Our house and farm were on a hill, with the pastures below, to find him tangled up and lying down. He had a few cuts and abrasions from the bridle rope, but the strangest injury was his bottom lip. It was as if something had grabbed it and tried to rip it off. The cartilage was stretched so badly he couldn't close it. You could see the stretch marks and the striations of blood under the skin. The vet checked him out and gave him some antibiotics, and within a couple of weeks or so his lip healed. But it was very strange. About a month or so later, we had some cows that broke through the fencing and wandered into the woods. My brother Jake, who was 17, big old rugged farm boy, Beard at 15, 2 of his friends, 2 of mine, and myself had to round them up. When we found one, 2 of us would run them back out of the woods and up to the barn. My brother and one of his friends went deep into the woods, and they were gone about 20 minutes. In the meantime, the rest of us, we found the cows, and 2 guys ran her back, and the other 2 of us waited for my brother and his bud. All of a sudden, we hear them yelling and running. My brother's nickname for me was, and still is, Charlie. I hear Jake scream, "Run, Charlie, run!" So I did. When we did get back up the hill and to the barn, we asked him what was the trouble. He says he saw big monkey people in the swamp, and one of them chased us. Now his friends, except the one that was with him, really started to razz them pretty hard, and they all laughed it off as a prank on Jake's part. But he wasn't laughing one bit. To this day, Jake still lives on that property. He won't go in that part of the woods anymore. To this day, he will not discuss it with just anyone, and will barely discuss it with me. When I introduced him to my wife for the first time, she asked him kiddingly, "Seen any Bigfoot lately?" He got very stoic and said, "I guess Charlie told you about that, huh?" It still does bother him to this day. He said that the one that charged him looked right at him. It was as if it could see right through me. He said it was not the eyes of an animal. My own personal experience happened the very next summer. My cousin Jerry, 9 at the time, and myself, 11, were picking berries down in the woods. We had a lot of black caps, which are blackberries, and raspberries down there, and we would have a contest to see who could pick the most or fill the bowl faster, something like that. Anyway, we were picking at what we call the thick patch. It was a huge thicket of berry bushes, and the berries were big as well. Well, Jerry's picking away, and suddenly he just started crying and saying, "I want to go home," dropped his bowl half full of berries, and just took off running. Not knowing what his problem was, and thinking he's a weird kid anyway, I seized the opportunity and started picking the fire out of those berries. Approximately 10 or 15 minutes had passed since Jerry's little meltdown, when I started to feel this wave of anxiety, I guess, go through my body. I didn't know what it was, but I remember that it felt odd. As I'm picking, I hear a whistle to my right, which is the direction that Jerry had run off in. I looked, but no one was there. Still anxious, I continued to pick, eat, and again, another whistle. As I reached into the thicket, still looking in the direction of the whistle, I suddenly realized that I'm touching hair. As I touched it, I looked to see what I was touching, and I saw a huge shoulder. It made a sort of snorting growl noise and started to move, and what I saw was taller than I was, and it was still crouching. That's when the feeling came over me. I became immediately terrified, pissed my pants. I felt as if I was being bear-hugged slowly. I then dropped my bucket and ran. Now, I've been blessed and cursed with a vivid memory. I am 40 years old and can still remember my childhood days as far back as the day before my 3rd birthday. My most vivid memory to this day is that accordion squeeze I felt that summer afternoon in 1981. I tried to tell my parents about it, but was told to stop about the Bigfoot nonsense. After 30 years of trying to forget it, I finally decided back in November of 2009 to embrace my experience. I've gotten involved with the research field, and I am hoping to grab this spear by the horns and try to deal, or heal, so to speak. Although my encounter was far from scary, as I really wasn't threatened in any way, I can still see the figure in that thicket, rocking as it squatted. I can still feel the squeeze slowly shutting my body down. I can still remember losing control of my bodily functions. It was an amazing yet terrifying experience. Today's bonus little encounter. The Welsh werewolf? ? Now, I live on the outskirts of Cardiff, the capital city of Wales, and I've never heard of this, but it immediately reminded me of 2 separate experiences I had in the surrounding fields and forests, not 5 minutes from my house. The first, I was about 11, and a friend and I were riding our bikes near the bushes when we stopped by some thick high grass. We stood around for a bit. It was sunny, clear skies, but we both heard a low growling. As we were kids and we couldn't see what was making the sounds, we crapped ourselves and rode off as fast as we could. We haven't spoken about it since. Now the second was much more clear. I was walking my dog along the brush of the forest whilst listening to my iPod. I was oblivious to what was going on around me. But when my dog yanked on the lead, which he didn't often do, I turned and took my headphones out to see why he had broken into a barking frenzy. I couldn't see the creature, but it moved, which drew my attention. It stood 20 feet in front of me, stood between 2 trees. It was skinny and slender, but unlike was a dog, the fur tangled, but it was charcoal color. The reason I refused to believe it was a dog was because its face was elongated like a wolf. This is when it gets messed up. As I turned to run, it turns to the trees, stood on its hind leg, ran across the bush and into the forest. I was so scared I ran past my house to my Nana's. I don't think it was a wolf because, A, what sort of wolf gets up on its hind legs and runs like a human? And the closest wolves to where I live are in Longleaf Safari Park, 80 miles away, and there had been no reports of any escapes. Now, the second experience was last March, when I was 16, and to this day I can still remember it perfectly. I don't want to say it was a werewolf or a dog man, but I am being led to say that.
And there you have it, folks, this night-ending bonus, which I do hope you all enjoyed as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. I'd like to thank you all for supporting the channel. After all, it is your support that keeps this channel growing and going, and what gives folks like all of us a place and a chance to share our experiences and theories judgment-free. Just simply treated with the respect that we all deserve. Thank you. Everyone, please stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant, keeping an eye on our children, pets, family, and friends. These creatures are real. They are out there and dangerous. Share this information with those you love and care about, and it may just help save their lives someday. Until next time, never stop asking questions, never stop searching for the truth, and God bless.